Hello, everybody, and welcome to the RFP Success Show. I am your host, Lisa Rehurk, the number one sought-after authority on RFP success. And each week, we bring you information, strategy, or resources to help you win more business through RFPs and hopefully have a little fun doing it. So let's get this week's episode started. So I am really thrilled. I know every week I say I'm excited to introduce the guest, but this week I'm super thrilled to introduce you to Lesli Pintor. Lesli is a lecturer in business communication for the University of Arizona Eller College of Management. She's also a Leadership Challenge certified facilitator, and she's certified in DISC and 12 driving forces. And full disclosure, she's also my sister. So if she sounds a little bit like me, now you know why. So Lesli, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sis. I'm so excited to be here with you today.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's kind of funny. We've never done anything like this before. So
No, we have not. No, we have not. First time for everything.
First time for everything, absolutely. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in and just ask you to tell us a little bit about your background and what it is that you do.
Absolutely. So while Lisa said I work currently at the University of Arizona teaching business communication, which I do for undergraduate students who are juniors, I've only been doing that for a couple of years. I spent over 30 years in the banking business, most of which was here in Tucson, Arizona as a commercial real estate and business lender. So I've worked with lots of people over the years in their businesses and how they are trying to make money and grow their businesses. And now I'm working with undergraduate students who are getting ready to launch in their new careers.
So fun. And what we're going to talk about today is really dealing with conflict, because when we're talking about dealing with teams on an RFP and teams within your company, no matter where you are, but obviously this is the RFP Success Show, so I'm gonna always bring it back to the RFP side, but we're gonna talk a lot about conflict today. That's really the topic of the show, to help you all who are listening think through how to deal with conflict and how to deal with team members that annoy the hell out of you or frustrate the heck out of you. So first question, Les, is what do you think is the number one source for conflict in the work environment?
I think there are probably lots of different symptoms that show up, but probably the number one bottom line thing it relates to is a lack of communication. We all come to things with our own perceptions, our assumptions, and we tell ourselves our own stories in our heads. And if we don't communicate honestly and openly with people, we're going to have conflict and we're not going to be able to resolve it.
Yeah. So is that something you teach when you're working with your students, teaching them how to deal with conflict on the teams that they're on in the college, but then also when they get out into the real world, guess what? Life is not all a bowl of cherries. You are going to have conflict. Is this something that you guys discuss in your classes?
We do. We start by having everybody do something similar to a DISC assessment. We use a tool called People Styles because it's based on a book called People Styles, but it's a simple survey that's free that the students can do. So the benefit of having a tool like this is we get the students to start thinking about what kind of communication style do they have? What kind of communication style do your teammates have? Because honestly, communication styles are like different languages, right? You speak a different language than I do. And if we can understand our own style of communicating and we can understand the folks on our team, then we can start speaking a similar language that they understand. For example, if somebody is in People Styles, it would be an analytical person, and in DISC, it would be a C person. Those people like to communicate in details and lots of support and data. They like all the details, and they want to be accurate, very perfect, very precise in their communication. Somebody like a driver or a dominant in DISC, those people don't want all the gory details. So if you're working with somebody on a team who doesn't want you to go into all the details, and you spend 20 minutes trying to tell them how you made the sausage, the communication is not, you're just not going to connect. There's going to be frustration and conflict.
Yeah, and I love that because we do tend to approach things the way that we see the world, right? Like our own internal, I mean that's just human nature. We're approaching things from our own internal way. But how powerful is it if we can shift that and think about the person on the other end of our communication and really approach it from that? Do you find that the students really um kind of take this in? Do you
Yeah.
find that they yeah?
Yes, yes. Because we talk not only about what dominant style they have, but we also talk about what happens when that style is under stress.
Ah,
When you're under stress with your styles, for go back to the example I was using about the analytical or the C on a disc profile, those people when they get under stress tend to um, they can't get enough information and they have a hard time making a decision. Uh, and
ah,
and and the drivers or the dominant folks, they tend to just run over everybody and just you know force themselves on other people. So understanding not only the strengths of the styles, but what happens when people are under stress can sure help you understand what's happening when conflict starts to arise. One of the sayings we use, and I have to actually read this because I can't remember it precisely in my mind. It's a version of the golden rule: do unto others as they would have you do unto them. So in other
mm.
words, try to speak to people in their language and you will be a much more effective communicator and you will avoid a lot of conflict.
So it seems like that could be a lot of work for somebody to learn how to do that. What do you think? Well, before I ask this question, let me just back up real quick and just say to our listeners that there's a whole lot of these different assessments out there, and DISC is one form of assessment. The other one that you mentioned, what's it called?
People styles.
People styles, and this really tells you your behavioral style. It's an assessment to help you understand your behavioral style. And at the end of the call, Leslie's going to tell you how you can get in touch with her, and if you're interested in taking an assessment, she can help you learn how to do that using DISC because she's a certified facilitator there. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about DISC and all of that. But what's the first thing that people need to do to start? I mean, other than take the assessment, right?
Mm-hmm.
But aside from that, what do you think the first thing is for people to start to embrace and shifting their perspective into somebody else's perspective versus our own perspective?
Mm-hmm. We have to be better at listening.
Mm,
We I fall into this trap a lot. We oftentimes listen to respond rather
yeah.
than listen to understand. And if you think about, we think, okay, gosh, even you and me, for example, or me and my husband, or me and my coworkers. I mean, we live and work in the same place, uh,
Yeah.
but if you think about it in terms of a different language and how you would approach somebody from a different country where you don't speak the language and they don't speak your language, the effort that you put into trying to understand each other, it's kind of like that. Um,
Yeah.
trying to understand how another person communicates. We really have to listen.
It's a really great perspective too. I would guess that the opposite ends of the spectrum is where most conflict can occur. So somebody that's so you and I, for example, are relatively different. We're similar in some ways and extremely different in others. And
Mm-hmm.
so we have conflict because of where we've got the polarizing opposites,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay.
We just have to listen and try to communicate in the other person's language as much as you can.
Yeah. And that takes a little bit of empathy and a little bit of patience and persistence and yeah, all that fun stuff that we all absolutely love, right?
Right, especially when we're under stress, that becomes even less likely we're going to do those things.
Right. And the listeners, when you're in the middle of an RFP, there is stress, even if
Right.
it's a minimal amount, but you're working on a deadline and that automatically brings stress into play. And you have to think about that. And we talk about this actually a lot, not just communicating within the team, but communicating to the evaluators and communicating in the RFP and
Mm-hmm.
how you have to do that from their perspective, not just our own. So it's funny how it's so all encompassing, right? Not just one dimensional, but all these different pieces of the puzzle, and conflict is one of them. I love that.
It's true. Something you just said, and it's not so much. It is communication, but it's a little more subtle. When you're working on a team with an RFP and you've got different deadlines, people work differently in terms of deadlines. And you just mentioned differences that you and I have. I am the type of person who needs lots of lead time and likes to complete projects early rather than later and give some extra time at the end in case something comes up. And you are the opposite. You work better. You work better at the 11th hour.
Yeah.
And I think that, and I see this a lot with my student teams. They don't understand. We don't understand enough about each other. We assume that everybody else works the way we do.
Yeah.
And that's not true. And so the people who work better as procrastinators and 11th hour people drive the other people crazy, and vice versa. And so it's important. Just, I think when you get on a team, my biggest suggestion for folks who are, you get on a new RFP team, it is so worth the time up front to sit down and talk about these things. And
Great point.
Maybe even do something like a team charter or a team contract where you outline what are the goals, who is best in which role, how do we work, who likes to work early, who doesn't mind deadlines, what sorts of things stress you out. Spend some good time up front doing that, and you can clear a lot of hurdles at the very beginning. And then when stress and conflict come up later, you can always pull out this document and say, you know what, we all agreed that this is how we were going to operate, and this is how we were going to orient ourselves around the goal.
That's a really, really great idea. And, if everybody's willing to be honest with themselves, first and foremost, and with everybody else to say, hey, you know what, the likelihood of me getting you anything early is pretty low. It's going to be at the 10th hour. I'll meet the deadline, but it'll be at the 10th hour. Or
and don't brag me about it.
Right. Yeah. And understanding what people need more, which people need more details. Yeah, that's a really great point. I love that, that suggestion to have that conversation up front, because I don't think that happens very often.
I don't think it does either. I think people just tend to launch into things, and then everybody goes into it with their own assumptions and their own values that may be different from other people. Not that other people's are right, wrong, or indifferent. They're just different. There are a lot of free templates out there for a team charter. They don't have to be lengthy. They could be a page or two, but I find that just the fact that you sit and talk about it and everybody signs it kind of engages people in focusing on, we are a team, we have a contract with each other, we have goals to meet, and this is how we're going to be successful.
So let's just back up and can you kind of dummy down what is a charter? What is a team charter? What does that even mean?
It's basically a contract, if you will, where you outline what are the goals of the team, what's our mission, what do we want to accomplish or need to accomplish together, how are we going to do that, who is going to serve which roles on the team, who's going to be the editor and the proofreader.
And what does that even mean?
Exactly.
Silly as that sounds, but
it's true. It's true. Who's going to do the research? Who's going to, et cetera, et cetera. You have to talk about each person's strengths. And as you mentioned earlier, you have to be willing to own up to your own weaknesses or perceived weaknesses. It helps you all focus on everybody's strengths.
Yeah.
And it really helps because I think too, a lot of times we get on a project or a team, and again, we all have our own ideas of what is supposed to be accomplished.
Right.
And what the ultimate goal is. And it may sound silly. Well, gosh, if we're getting on an RFP team, we're going to do an RFP. Well, yeah, that's kind of basic, but there's some deeper things in there. And it can help build some camaraderie, and it really sets off on the right foot. I mean, planning takes a lot of work up front, but it pays off in the end. I often use a quote by Albert Einstein. He said something to the effect of, if I had an hour to plan, I'd spend 55 minutes on thinking about it and 5 minutes on the plan.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. People do hate to plan, and I am 100% with you. I mean, if you're not a planner, so one of the quotes that my dad uses, and I say this all the time, I feel like I've said it a million times this week, my dad uses this quote, but he says, don't give me credit for it because it's not my quote. But if you don't get the foundation right, it's going to follow you all the way to the roof. And planning is that foundation, right? If you don't get
Absolutely.
that planning right, something's going to fall apart somewhere on the way to the roof. So,
Agreed. And I find it hilarious that I've never heard him say that quote. But I love it. I think it's a great quote.
yeah, I love it too. So, what advice would you give somebody if they didn't like one of their team members? So,
Mm.
obviously the obvious question. I'm not going to go any further. What do you think about that?
Well, um, first of all, you have to stick strictly to business.
Oh,
So
okay.
oftentimes we get personality stuff gets involved. And you have to constantly remind yourself of those team goals. Again, if you've got something like a team charter, team contract, whatever you want to call it, if you've got something like that you all worked on together at the beginning, it's easy to pull that out and say, look, I know we may not always get along, we may not like each other, but we have some common goals and some common things we need to accomplish. Let's remind ourselves that this is a business project. We need to work together to make this successful. Let's put all that other stuff aside and focus on what we need to do.
And so, at what point would you suggest they have that conversation? Because I don't know about you, but I find people have a really hard time sitting down and having a conversation. They avoid it for a really long time or whatever. So, at what point do you think they should even have that conversation?
Sooner rather than later. Sorry I don't have the source for this right off the top of my head here, but many of your listeners may be familiar with the 4 stages of teams: the
Okay.
forming stage, the norming stage, or the storming stage, the norming stage, and the performing stage. And so the key is, first of all, to recognize that most, if not all, teams go through some sort of storming phase, and that's where there's conflict, people don't get along. But the thing to remember about that is the longer you stay in that phase, the harder it's going to be to get to the norming and the performing stage.
Hmm.
So you've got to recognize that it's probably going to happen, that there will be conflicts and disagreements. Okay, just
Yep.
that's the nature of human beings. 2, deal with it sooner rather than later, and get it all out there so you can move on and be successful. I think a lot of that has to do with we have to own our own stuff first of all. I know I get frustrated with other people, and I find that if I stop and slow myself down and say, okay, remind myself that everybody on this team wants the team to succeed.
Hopefully, but yes.
Hopefully, what are the other people's intentions? And
Yep.
more often than not, everybody's intentions are the same. Um, it's just that we all come about that or go about that a different way, and we have to own our own piece of that conflict and that disagreement.
Yeah.
Um, we have to. I think the key is to sit down with those people and just ask a lot of questions.
Yeah.
We don't seem to be seeing eye to eye on this. Help me understand where you're coming from and what your point of view is. And if we ask a lot of questions instead of accusing and pointing fingers, if we ask a lot
Mm.
of questions, we can get to the understanding better. We can get to the root of the problem, perhaps. And then, sometimes, gosh darn it, we have to compromise.
Oh, compromise.
Compromise, compromise.
Exactly. What kind of BS are you trying to sell us, Les? But it's true. I think that if I imagine somebody coming to me about something that they think I'm doing wrong, and if they start spewing at me versus maybe asking some questions, I'm going to be much more defensive if they're coming at me and accusing me versus just asking me some questions and let's have an open dialogue conversation about this so we can solve it together.
Absolutely. I have a student team right now that's having a lot of challenge with one team member who doesn't seem to be pulling his weight on the team.
Ah,
And the other teammates are frustrated with him because they're trying to do really well, and he's just kind of la 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 la. And they found out that his only goal really in the class is to get by with a C.
Oh,
And, and so once they understand, once the students who want to get an A understood that he has a different motivation, they can work around that better. And they can probably be less frustrated going forward in some ways because they know he's not going to change. They're
yeah.
just going to have to work around his motivations and figure out how the rest of them can be successful.
Well, it's interesting. I was just going to ask you that question. What do you do when somebody's not carrying their weight? And that's a really great, again, going into that, let's have the conversation about it to understand where their motivation lies or what their intention is, because we're going to make assumptions that we're all working at the same level, or that we do all want the same outcome. And it sounds like maybe having that conversation to really dig in and ask those questions to get to the bottom of, what do you really want out of this, can really help understand why they're not pulling their own weight.
Absolutely. And that's a perfect question. Tell me, help me understand what you want out of this. What do you see as success for this team?
Yeah.
For this project, because that is the basic bottom line question that could reveal a lot.
Yeah, and I love that we're relating this to college kids, right? Because they're still fresh and new in life for the most part, right? They don't have as much baggage and they don't have as much crazy head games going on. And it just goes to show that we all are struggling with the same things. And some of the things that you're talking about are simple and basic, but they're not always easy.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. They sound almost too simple and basic. But more often than not, we don't do them.
Yeah. Yeah. So how about this? How do you deal with a team member who's being combative or maybe undermining your authority?
Yeah, that's even tougher, because my reaction would be to be combative back.
Right. Same here. Something we do have in common.
Yes. Again, that has to go back to that try to understand. I find more often than not, and I like this metaphor, if you will, but sometimes people feel like they're backed into a corner.
Yeah.
Or they're not being utilized well enough, or they don't understand how they fit into the whole big picture. So again, I think asking some questions, help me understand why maybe that person isn't in the right role on that particular team. Maybe their strengths lie somewhere else. Maybe they need to have a bigger picture understanding of how it all fits together. And sometimes you have to get somebody else involved to help mediate.
Yeah.
Bottom line, if you can't see eye to eye with somebody. This might seem a little unrelated, but it is. I find it interesting. Most companies do performance reviews, individual performance reviews.
Right.
But more and more work that employees do is in teams.
Okay.
And so there's some talk and research going on out there about doing team performance reviews. One of the things we do with our students, because our students work on a team all semester long in 3 classes. It's the same team in 3 classes for 16 weeks. Yikes is right.
Yikes if they don't like each other.
Right. It works well if they like each other, but it doesn't. But after every big major deliverable, we have them do 360 evaluations on everybody on the team, including themselves.
Yep.
And so that can be quite telling, and that can be something that folks might want to implement in the corporate environment, because it's important that higher ups who are managing these teams understand some of the team dynamics that went on. If I'm working on a team of 6 people and I've got that social loafer who's just riding on everybody's
social loafer.
Yeah, he's riding on everybody else's work. That may not show up in a performance review unless the team is asked to evaluate each other.
That's very, very true. That's very true. And, the other thing I find interesting about this is, sometimes somebody's just going to be an asshole.
Yep.
Like sometimes you're just going to have that. But instead of assuming that, right out of the gate. Like if you go in and you have the conversation and you ask the questions or you give the feedback or whatever, you're not going to know if that's truly what they are. And if it gets to that point where that's just, all right, this person's just a jerk and they're going to continue to undermine. And I think that's when you know it's time to get somebody else involved.
Yep. And
Right.
sometimes somebody needs to be fired from the team.
Yeah. Yep.
And somebody
Absolutely.
else needs to come in. Maybe through that team charter exercise at the very beginning, the team might realize they don't have certain skills that need to be on the team.
Mm.
And so that's another reason why that's a good exercise, is you want to make sure you have all the right skill sets to be put on a team. And each RFP is going to be different. You may have a team that kind of works together all the time, but certain RFPs might need different skill sets, and that's important to figure out at the beginning before you get too far in.
Very, very true. And really what it comes down to, it sounds like, is open communication, right?
Right. Sounds easy.
Sounds so easy. So what is one top tip you would give people that are struggling right now, maybe with conflict or miscommunication on a team? What's your top takeaway for our listeners?
Take a deep breath.
Hmm.
Think about your own role in it. Are you being really honest with yourself? And figure out a way to have a conversation with that person. I think the biggest takeaway that I talk to my students about is to keep it business.
Yep.
Keep the personalities out of it as much as possible. Keep it strictly to business. And what did you all agree upon at the very beginning that you would do about these situations?
And lo and behold, you've got to agree to something in the beginning in order to come back to that. So, yeah.
It's well worth a couple of hours of time at the beginning, I think.
Very nice. Well, this has been a great conversation. And I know for those of you out there listening that, a lot of times on RFP teams, somebody's at a lower level that's trying to manage people at higher levels. And a lot of this can feel difficult, but some huge, amazing, great takeaways here, Les. I appreciate you being here. So I know you do a lot of training and consulting around leadership, communication, team development. How can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more or take an assessment?
Probably the easiest way is to find me on LinkedIn.
Perfect.
My cell phone number and my email address are on there. So the key is to spell my name correctly, however, which is a little bit unusual. So you can find me Lesli, Lesli, and my last name is Pintor, Pintor. Look forward to seeing you on LinkedIn. And if you want to connect with me, fine, but please tell me how you found me, because if I don't recognize you at all, I'm not going to connect.
Yeah, send a message via LinkedIn and let her know that you heard her on this podcast. And again, it's Lesli, no E on the end of Leslie.
Absolutely.
That's what trips people up all the time. So Les, thanks so much for being here. I greatly appreciate it.
My pleasure. Hugs to you.
Thanks, you too. All right, everybody. So you have been listening to the RFP Success Show. And if you like what you're hearing, of course, we always want you to subscribe. Please leave a review and share with your colleagues. Until next time, signing off.